So, it's been the first official day of campaigning, with party leaders crisscrossing the UK, setting out their stall ahead of the general election, of course, on the 4th of July. There will be 650 seats up for grabs, and throughout this morning on Breakfast we're taking a look at three constituencies in particular. The first one we're going to take a look at is in the East Midlands. It's Ashfield. It was gained by the Conservatives in 2019 with a majority of 5,733. You can see the numbers there. But the MP, Lee Anderson, has since defected to Reform UK. Our reporter, Simon Ward, has been hearing how constituents are feeling ahead of the election.
It's going to be a summer election. The politicians will tell you that brighter days are on the way. But some people here say the town of Sutton in Ashfield in Nottinghamshire could do with a lift. Ashfield in Nottinghamshire can now be considered to be a four-way marginal, with Reform UK, the independent group Labour and the Conservatives all hoping to do well here. We must also think about the other seats in the area that have previously turned from Labour to the Conservatives: Bolsover, Bassetlaw, Mansfield and here in Ashfield. And after that shock announcement about a summer general election, people here have been considering what they'd like to hear from the politicians.
Bus service seems to be OK, as long as they don't cancel bus pass. That's the main thing, really. But it's just OAP'd.
Annoyed me more than anything is when he put all these migrants into the hotels. 6.8 million a day. What could we have done with that?
Hospitals, or what changing hospitals, and obviously the NHS and things like that, care homes.
Well, I think it really needs a lot of cleaning up, and it hasn't been cleaned up for a long time.
Ashfield needs improvements, does it?
Yes.
There was no great excitement for the election, but it's early days. The campaign will intensify. Lee Anderson is the Reform MP here, and he's previously been the Conservative MP for Ashfield on what's been a long political journey for him. Ria Keane will be the candidate for Labour, and for the independent group who run the local council here, they have Jason Zadrozny as their candidate. There's a lot for voters to consider. The other parties haven't yet announced their candidates for this constituency. Simon Ward, BBC News.
Well, we're joined now by the leader of the Reform Party, Richard Tice. A very good morning to you. Good to see you from Westminster. Can we pick up on Simon's point there? He talked about Lee Anderson, previously a Conservative MP. The reality where Reform candidates are standing is that they will be taking votes from the Conservatives and, in doing so, potentially gifting seats to Labour in the Red Wall.
Not at all. There's no difference between the two main parties. They're both forms of socialism. They stand for high taxes, high regulation, big state, zero growth, and that's why everybody is getting poorer per person. And what Reform UK and Lee Anderson stand for actually is high growth, low taxes, and actually we need to freeze immigration so that the country can catch up. The migration statistics released yesterday show that essentially the Tories have allowed mass immigration over the last 2 years. More people have settled in the UK than in 950 years up until 2010. OK,
we'll come back to immigration in a moment. I just want to ask you again about these marginal seats. If we look at Bury North, not far from here, where there's 105 votes in it, or Haywood and Middleton, 600 votes in it. Do you dispute that in a situation that's that tight, it's unlikely you're going to take the seat, but you will take enough seats from the Conservatives to give the seat to Labour?
My job is to promote, and our job is to promote Reform UK. We're the only party that's got a plan and an agenda for growing this economy, making people better off, for getting to zero waiting lists on healthcare. The two main parties, there's no difference between the two. If you want socialism, you'll get socialism if you vote for the two main parties. We'll all become poorer and you'll have mass immigration. That's the point, and that's why it's vital we stand in all the seats in England, Scotland and Wales, so people have got a proper democratic choice, and then it's up to the voters. That's what democracy is all about.
OK, let's talk about those candidates then. You're looking to field 630.
That's right. England, Scotland, Wales.
Who are they going to be?
We've got about 500 approved and allocated already on our website. I think we may even be more organised. The Conservatives, the story is that they've still got hundreds still to allocate. They can't seem to find enough candidates.
So are you certain that everybody on your list of 500 is credible without skeletons in the closet?
Sorry, I missed the question.
Are you certain that on your list of 500 everybody is credible, they've been vetted, there are no worrying skeletons in the closet?
Everybody is being vetted, and just like all parties, a vetting it's like an MOT. It's valid the day you do it. If someone does or writes something inappropriate afterwards, we're faster than anybody else to make an assessment and decide whether anybody has stepped over our very strict guidance. So yes, we'll be standing everywhere. We're very proud of that. And we're giving voters a serious alternative choice. We've got to freeze immigration. We've got to scrap the lunacy, job-destroying, job-killing net zero, which is costing us tens of billions of hard-earned taxpayers' cash. These are the choices the British people need to make. And if we want to get better off, if we want faster healthcare, that's the choice that people need to consider.
Let's talk about immigration then. If there was another humanitarian crisis, the likes we saw in Ukraine a couple of years ago, where British people opened their hearts, opened their homes, what would you do in a similar situation? At what point do you close the door?
What we're saying is, in normal circumstances, you should freeze immigration, except if you've got essential needs for healthcare-related immigration, if required over and above that. And of course, if there are specific emergency situations like the Ukraine one you just mentioned, of course one applies a level of common sense. And that's what we stand for at Reform, actually, is common sense. And it's not common sense to tax people.
What does that mean when we have an NHS heavily reliant on migrant workers, and you're saying you're going to reduce waiting lists to zero when we do have humanitarian crises across the globe? What does common sense mean in these areas that there isn't a specific number for?
What common sense means is it's not common sense to have 1 in 8 of the working age population on out-of-work benefits whilst big business profit hugely by importing cheap, low-skilled overseas labour rather than in training up and employing our own people. In the 1980s and 1990s, when we were growing at about 3% a year, we weren't having mass immigration, and guess what? We had much lower waiting lists. We trained up our own nurses and doctors. That's what common sense is all about, rather than enabling big business to make huge profits. It's common sense that if there's an emergency situation like Ukraine, as I said, you look at the situation of the time. But it's also common sense that actually the job of the British government is to look after British citizens, to help people's quality of life get better. And if you have mass immigration, guess what? Quality of life gets worse, housing rents go up, healthcare is slower and worse outcomes, and everybody gets people's wages are depressed and undercut. That's not common sense.
And you're
that's against the British
that
interest.
Those jobs in health and social care, that those jobs in agriculture, manufacturing could be filled in good time by British citizens.
Absolutely, because that's how it worked really rather well in the 1980s and 1990s. What mass immigration has done has depressed British wages. It's put unacceptable demand on our housing. Young people suffer the most. It's simply unfair. Young people all over the country having to pay much, much higher rates, can't get on the housing ladder. Older people suffering because they can't get faster access to healthcare because of the huge extra pressure on public services. And for the media and big business to say we need lots of mass immigration, no we don't. What we actually need is common sense policies, train up our own people, make work pay.
So while you're lowering taxes and training up young UK citizens, where will the money come from?
The money will come from, for example, scrapping the hugely expensive job-destroying net zero. For example, the Bank of England is voluntarily, negligently, paying interest on all the QE money that was printed. That's about £35 billion a year. The Treasury and the Chancellor, they can't dispute my figures because I'm right. This money is being used to enrich city institutions away from the taxpayer rather than pay for what we say, which is our plan to get to zero waiting lists on healthcare.
And scrapping net zero,
no, it's really critical. We're the only political party that with a serious plan for healthcare to get to zero waiting lists. We're ambitious, we're optimistic, we're businesslike, we've got a plan.
And
no one else has.
And you're the only party who doesn't seem to be concerned about the future of the planet. That's something that does affect young people. We know that it's at the forefront of the minds of young voters.
Absolutely. And here's the point, right? Net zero will make zero difference to climate change, as confirmed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that says if you get to net zero tomorrow, it'll make no difference to the level of sea level rise for between 200 and 1,000 years. Actually, what we need to do with climate change, of course, we all care about the environment of the planet. You need to adapt to it. The idea that you can stop the power of the sun or volcanoes is simply ludicrous. And anybody who thinks you can, frankly, you're misinformed.
OK, finally, if Nigel Farage is watching this morning, what would you like to say to him? Presumably come back from the States and help with this campaign.
He's not in the States, he's here, he's confirmed yesterday. And I'm thrilled that he's helping the campaign throughout the 6 weeks until July the 4th. He's going to be everywhere, all over the country, campaigning. And actually, the way to save Britain is to vote for the common sense policies of Reform UK.
Are you disappointed that he's not standing for you?
I'm thrilled to bits that he's campaigning for us, with us, all over the country over the next 6 weeks. That's great news, and he's going to have a big impact.
Richard Tice, thank you for your time from Westminster this morning.